Greenwich, Connecticut, 11:47 p.m. She had exactly 22 minutes to catch her ride home. Amara had 2 hours of sleep behind her, a 14-hour shift caring for the children, and eyes so heavy she could barely read the address on her phone screen. All she wanted was to collapse into her tiny apartment bed and forget the world existed for at least 12 hours. She had called the same car service she always used, and when the sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb and the driver waved her in without a word, she didn't question it. The interior was different from the usual cars she took. Dark leather, smelling of expensive cologne and something she couldn't name. Quieter. More dangerous if she had been paying attention. Must be an upgrade, she thought, sinking into the seat like it was swallowing her whole. Lucky me. Finally, something goes right today. She was asleep before the door closed. The problem? She woke to a deep, controlled voice that carried the kind of quiet authority that made rooms go silent. "You're in my car." When Amara opened her eyes, the man sitting across from her in the rear-facing seat was not what she expected. His suit was impeccably cut. She didn't recognize the brand, but it cost more than she made in 3 months. He had sharp, angular features, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes so dark they absorbed the light rather than reflected it. He studied her with more curiosity than anger, which, under the circumstances, should have been more frightening. "Sorry, Her voice came out rough from sleep. He raised one hand, not dismissively, just efficiently. And she stopped. "We're already on the interstate." Amara looked out the window. He was right. The city lights were behind them, the skyline glittering in the distance. The road ahead was dark and empty. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice embarrassingly small. "My estate, outside the city." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Sicily, eventually, but we stop there first." 3 seconds. That was how long it took for the information to reach her sleep-deprived brain and explode into full panic. "I got into the wrong car?" She sat up so fast the seatbelt locked across her chest. "I'm supposed to be going home. I need to get out." He blinked. If she hadn't been cataloging his face with the intense attention of someone trying to assess a threat level, she would have missed the fractional shift in his expression. Something that might have been amusement, on a different man, in a different life. "The doors are locked from the outside for security reasons. We're traveling at 90 miles an hour. Getting out is inadvisable." Amara pressed her face to the glass. He wasn't exaggerating. Highway, speed, no exits in sight. "Oh, God." She turned to him, desperation bypassing any filter she had left. "I'm so sorry. I thought this was my car service. I'm just a nanny. I take care of children. I'm no one. You can drop me at the next exit. I'll call another—" "No." The word was quiet, final. The kind of word that didn't leave room for debate. She stared at him. "No?" He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture so precise it seemed rehearsed, and looked at her with those impossible dark eyes. "We're going to my estate. You're staying tonight. Tomorrow we'll arrange your return." Another pause. "Or not." "Or not," she repeated. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her the way people look at something unexpected that they haven't yet decided how to categorize. Not with menace, with something more unsettling, genuine interest. "I have a meeting tomorrow," he said finally. "My associate is bringing his 4-year-old daughter. Her mother is unavailable. The child speaks only Korean and some English. My staff doesn't speak either." He tilted his head slightly. "You're a nanny." Amara blinked. "Yes, but—" "Do you speak Korean?" She did. Also French, Spanish, some Russian, and enough Italian to get by. The families she worked for were wealthy and international, and she had always believed languages were the closest thing to superpowers a person without money could acquire. "Yes," she said carefully. "I speak Korean. But that doesn't mean—" "Then we have an arrangement." He said it the way people in his world made arrangements, not as a question, not even as an offer, as a fact that had already been decided. "I haven't agreed to anything." For the first time, something shifted in those dark eyes. Not anger, something almost like respect. "No," he said. "You haven't." He extended his hand across the space between them. "My name is Yoon Ki-jang." The name hit her like a cold wave. Yoon Ki-jang. She had heard that name before, not from news articles or society pages, but in whispers. In the careful way people lowered their voices in certain neighborhoods. The name people used when they were talking about someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard across an entire city. "The Yoon Ki-jang," she said before she could stop herself. Something crossed his face. Not pride. Something more complicated. "That's the one." Amara looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. She should have been terrified. Every reasonable instinct she had was telling her to be terrified. Instead, she felt something strange. The particular clarity that comes when you've already fallen and the only thing left to decide is how you're going to land. She shook his hand. "Amara Mensa," she said. "Professional nanny. Apparently also a very bad judge of which black SUV is hers." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. The most controlled, barely there almost smile she had ever seen on a human face. "We have an arrangement, Amara Mensa." The car moved through the dark. The Jang estate was not what Amara had expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had expected. A fortress, maybe, or something that announced its own danger the way certain buildings do. What she found instead was beautiful. It sat at the end of a long private drive lined with old oak trees, a stone manor that looked like it had grown out of the hillside rather than been built on it. There were lights in the windows, warm, amber, and the sound of fountains somewhere in the dark. It was, she thought with the slightly unhinged clarity of exhaustion, the most gorgeous place she had ever been taken against her will. Hyun Ki walked ahead of her without looking back, as if he was entirely certain she would follow. She did, mostly because the alternative, standing alone in the dark on the grounds of a man whose name made neighborhoods go quiet, seemed considerably worse. "You'll have a room in the East Wing," he said as they entered the main hall. "My staff will bring you anything you need." The interior was all dark wood and stone floors, and art on the walls that looked real in the way art in museums looks real. Careful, deliberately placed, part of a story being told by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Your associate," Amara said, looking around at a painting she was almost certain was worth more than her entire life. "The one with the daughter. Is the meeting dangerous?" Hyun Ki stopped walking. He turned to look at her with an expression that was difficult to read, which she was beginning to understand was simply his default. "The meeting is business," he said. "That's not what I asked." A pause, the same assessing look. "No, it isn't." She waited. "Seo Jin Park is an old associate," Hyun Ki said after a moment. "His daughter, Sora, is 4. Her mother left 8 months ago. He brings her everywhere now because he doesn't trust anyone else with her." Something shifted in his voice, a flicker of something that might have been recognition, on a man who had learned to keep recognition carefully concealed. "Sora doesn't speak much to anyone." Amara thought of the children she had cared for over the years, The ones who went silent not from shyness, but from grief, from disruption, from the particular confusion of being very young in a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. How long since her mother left? 8 months. She's 4 years old. Yes. Amara looked at him. He was watching her with that focused attention again. The kind that felt less like being observed and more like being understood, which was somehow more disconcerting. Okay, she said. I'll help with Sora. I know, he said, and turned to continue down the hallway. She wanted to be annoyed by the certainty. She found, irritatingly, that she wasn't. Her room was at the end of a long corridor, and it was, again, not what she expected. No lock on the outside, no guard at the door. Just a large, quiet room with windows that looked out over the garden. A bed that looked like falling into it would feel like disappearing, and a bathroom with a tub she could practically swim in. On the dresser, fresh clothes in her size, 1 tags still on, and a note, handwritten in precise dark ink. If you need anything tonight, ask the staff. Breakfast is at 7. The meeting is at 9. H.J. Amara stood there for a long moment, holding the note, feeling the surrealism of her own life pressing against her from all sides. She had been taken, technically, by the most powerful and feared man in the city. He had put her in a beautiful room, given her clean clothes, and left her a note like a concierge. She sat on the edge of the bed. She fell asleep, holding the note. Sora Park was the smallest, most serious person Amara had ever met. She arrived the next morning in her father's arms, a tiny girl with enormous dark eyes and the careful stillness of a child who had learned to be invisible. She wore a white dress that was slightly too big and held a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing so tightly it looked like it might lose the other one too. Seo-jin Park was everything Amara expected from a man in Hyun-ki's world. Broad, watchful, the kind of dangerous that had settled into his body like sediment over years. He spoke to Hyun-ki in low, quick Korean, his eyes moving around the room in the professional sweep of someone who never truly stopped working. Then his eyes landed on Amara, and he stopped. Who is she? Before Hyun-ki could answer, Amara crouched down to Sora's eye level and said in Korean, Hello, Sora. My name is Amara. That is a very beautiful rabbit. Sora stared at her. Seo-jin stared at her. Even Hyun-ki went very still. Sora looked down at the rabbit, then back at Amara, and then said, her voice barely a whisper, like she had forgotten how to use it at full volume. His name is Luca, Amara said seriously. What a beautiful name. Something cracked open in Sora's face. Not a smile, not yet, but the beginning of one, like light under a door. Seo-jin looked at Hyun-ki with an expression Amara couldn't fully read, but that seemed to contain several layers of surprise and something that looked, briefly, like relief. Where did you find her? Hyun-ki said, without any particular inflection. She got into my car. Seo-jin looked at Amara. Amara looked back, and because she had been awake too long and had stopped filtering herself somewhere around hour 16 of the previous day, she said in Korean, Wrong car service. Easy mistake. A beat of absolute silence. Then Seo-jin Park, the man whose reputation made grown men in 3 countries nervous, laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, surprised out of him like something he hadn't expected. He told Hyun-ki, clapping him on the shoulder, Keep her. Amara chose not to examine how Hyun-ki's eyes moved to her face after that, or what she saw there, or why her heart did something complicated in response. She had a child to take care of. Sora spent the morning leading Amara through the estate's gardens, introducing her to every flower by name, old names, names her grandmother had apparently taught her before Sora stopped talking very much. They sat together under an oak tree and told Luca the rabbit stories in 2 languages. Amara taught Sora 3 words in English: sky, rabbit, and home. Sora taught Amara the Korean word for safe. Sora said, curling into Amara's side like something small finding warmth. Grandmother says it means you're where nothing bad can happen. Amara held very still. Yes, she said softly. That's exactly what it means. She did not look toward the window of the study, where she could feel, without seeing, Hyun-ki watching. The meeting ended at noon. Seo-jin Park shook Hyun-ki's hand, a contract sealed in the old way, with the weight of names and history behind it, and collected a slightly reluctant Sora, who had to be gently separated from Amara and Luca the rabbit with promises of a return visit. When they were gone, the estate went quiet in the particular way that large old places do, like a held breath. Hyun-ki found Amara in the garden, sitting on the low stone wall where Sora had been, her shoes off, her face tipped up toward the early autumn sun. She looked, he thought, completely unlike anyone who had ever been in this house, not performing calm. Actually calm, the way she had been asleep in his car, unself-consciously, entirely herself. He had spent 36 years building walls that were, by any objective measure, impenetrable. He was finding this irritating. The meeting went well, he said. I know, Amara said, without opening her eyes. I heard Seo-jin laugh. In my experience, when the most frightening man in a room laughs, something either went very right or very wrong. Very right. Good. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Sora is going to be okay, you know? She just needs consistency. Someone who shows up the same way every day? He said nothing. He was looking at her with that focused, unreadable attention. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you looked at her the way people look at things they're worried about but don't know how to fix. She paused. You're not good at not being able to fix things. A silence. The fountain nearby. Somewhere. Birds. Most people, Hyun-ki said slowly, don't say things like that to me. Most people are scared of you. You're not. She considered this genuinely, which somehow was worse than if she had denied it. I think, she said carefully, that you're exactly as dangerous as everyone says. I just don't think you're dangerous to me. The sentence landed between them with a weight that neither of them immediately addressed. Why not? He asked. His voice was quieter than usual. Because you put fresh clothes on the dresser, and you wrote a note. She looked at him steadily. Dangerous people don't write notes, Hyun-ki. They send men. He looked at her for a long moment, then very quietly. I've never written anyone a note before. Something shifted between them. Fragile, electric, impossible to name. What's your world like? Amara asked. The real version, not what Seo-jin Park sees. He sat down on the wall beside her, which was, she sensed, not something he did, not casually, not with anyone. Loud, he said after a moment. Even when it's quiet, it's loud. Everyone wants something. Everyone is calculating something. You walk into a room, and you're reading faces, exits, loyalties. You're always working, even when you're sleeping. A pause. Especially when you're sleeping. When did you last stop? He was silent long enough that she had her answer. Sora stopped, Amara said softly. For about 40 minutes under that tree. She forgot to be careful. She was just a kid telling a rabbit a story. She looked at him. You watched from the window the whole time. I work from the study in the mornings. Hyun-ki. He exhaled. One small, controlled exhale, the only concession to being understood that he allowed himself. Yes, I watched. Why? Longer silence. The sun moved. A cloud passed. Because it looked like peace, he said finally. I had forgotten what it looked like. Amara said nothing. She understood about forgetting what peace looked like. She had spent years in other people's houses, caring for other people's children, saving for a future that kept getting pushed back. And she had built a life that worked, that was good, that she was grateful for. But peace, real peace, was something she had quietly stopped expecting. I'll need to go back, she said. I have a family I work for, children who need... I know. He said it plainly, no weight to it. I'll have someone drive you this afternoon. Your car service has been refunded, for the record, she laughed, a genuine sound, surprised out of her. You refunded my car service? You didn't receive what you paid for. I received a painting worth a fortune, a 4-year-old named Sora, and an existential crisis. I'd call it a net positive. The almost smile again, more visible this time, like it was getting harder to suppress. Amara. His voice had changed. Lower, more careful, in the way that careful can sound when someone is trying very hard not to be reckless. CEO Jin will bring Sora back next week. The meeting went well. What? But there are details to... He stopped. Started again, differently. Sora responded to you in a way I haven't seen her respond to anyone in 8 months. I know. I would like to offer you a position, caring for Sora when Seo Jin brings her here. Properly paid. Properly arranged. He met her eyes. No more wrong cars. She looked at him. She thought about saying no. She thought about how every sensible thing she knew about the world was telling her to say no. She thought about Sora, curled against her side under the oak tree, saying the word. She thought about this man who had never written anyone a note and had spent the morning watching a 4-year-old and a rabbit from a window as if they were something he had been searching for without knowing it. All right, she said. But one condition. His eyebrow lifted fractionally. You come outside, not watch from the window. You come into the garden and you sit under the tree and you let Sora tell you a story about Luca the rabbit. No phone, no business. She held his gaze. That's the arrangement. He studied her. She met the study without flinching. Deal, he said, and extended his hand. When their fingers met, something passed between them. Not just electricity, though there was that. Something older. The particular feeling of a door opening that had been closed for a very long time. She shook his hand. She did not let go quite as quickly as she should have. Neither did he. Over the weeks that followed, Amara came to the estate every Thursday when Seo Jin brought Sora. Then sometimes on Sundays, when Hyun Ki had quiet business, and Sora had been left in the care of staff who loved her, but couldn't reach her the way Amara could. Then sometimes, on days when there was no business and no Sora, just a phone call that began with something practical. A question about a book Sora had mentioned, a detail about the garden, and became, gradually, something else. She learned the shape of his world in pieces, the way it operated by codes older than law, with a loyalty that was absolute and debts that were paid in full or not at all. The weight he carried, the men who depended on him, the families under his protection, the knowledge that the city's particular balance held partly because of decisions he made in rooms she would never see. He learned the shape of hers, the families she had worked for over 9 years, the languages she had learned in other people's kitchens, the savings account she was building toward a future that kept getting quietly deferred. The aunt and uncle who had raised her after her parents died when she was 11. The particular loneliness of caring for everyone else's children while knowing quietly that she would have liked some of her own. "You'd be a remarkable mother," Hyun-ki said once, watching her with Sora in the garden. "Occupational hazard," Amara said. "You spend enough time with children, you either love them or you don't." "I love them." "I know." He was quiet a moment. "I wanted children. Before." Before. The word sat between them, and she didn't push it, and he eventually said, without being asked, "There was a woman, years ago. She thought she could live in my world, and found that she couldn't." Which was honest of her. More honest than staying. "Were you in love with her?" "I was in love with the idea of having a life that looked like other people's lives." He looked at his hands. "It's not the same thing." Amara thought about this. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her, the full, direct look she had stopped trying to escape. The one that felt like being read by someone who was genuinely interested in what the words said. "Do you think," he asked carefully, "that someone in my world can have what other people have?" She knew what he was asking. She had known for weeks, in the way you know things you're not quite ready to say out loud. "I think," she said, "that some things grow in unexpected soil." Sora was barely speaking 8 months ago. Now she narrates Luca the rabbit's entire autobiography every time I arrive. She met his eyes. "Growing things don't ask permission. They just grow." The silence that followed was full. Later, when Seo-jin had collected Sora and the estate had gone to its particular quiet, Hyun-ki found Amara in the garden, sitting where she always sat, watching the late sun on the stone walls. He sat beside her. Close. Not touching. "Amara." "I know," she said softly. She was looking at the wall, but she could feel him, the heat of him, the focus, the particular careful tension of a man who did not allow himself to be reckless and was fighting visibly against that training. "This is not simple," he said. "No. My world has weight. Real weight. The kind that—" "Hyun-ki." She turned to look at him. His face, up close, in the soft evening light, was so much less the thing people feared. It was just a face. His face. Tired, occasionally, in the way that people who carry things are tired, and watching her with something that was so plainly hope that it made her chest ache. "I know what your world is. I've seen it. I'm not afraid of weight." "You should be." "Maybe." She didn't look away. "But I'm more afraid of another 10 years of other people's houses, other people's children, watching everyone else live while I'm very carefully surviving." He reached out and touched her face. One thumb, one slow line from her cheekbone to the corner of her mouth. And she felt it everywhere. "Amara Mensa," he said. His voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with danger. "You got into the wrong car." "Best mistake I ever made." When he kissed her, it wasn't urgent or crashing. It was deliberate, like a decision being made out loud. Soft first, then deeper, then the kind of kiss that means something is ending and something else is beginning, and both things are true at once. When they pulled apart, the garden was dark and the fountain was running, and the first stars were out over the Jang estate. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, and took her hand with the same precision he used for everything, the same certainty. "You stop surviving, and you start living, and I stop watching peace from windows." He looked at her. She looked at him. The whole complicated, dangerous, impossible thing settled around them like something that had always been waiting to land. "Deal," she said. "It all started with the wrong car, but this was always the right destination." 2 years after getting into the wrong car, Amara Mensa, who was, by then, Amara Jang in every way that mattered, stood in front of a mirror in a luxurious room, wearing a dress that looked like it had been woven from moonlight. Simple, elegant, and completely stunning. Her aunts, Grace and Ruth, were behind her, trying not to cry and failing miserably. "You look beautiful, my darling," Aunt Grace said, wiping her eyes for the third time in 5 minutes. "Your mother and father would be so proud." Amara felt tears prick her own eyes, but blinked quickly. She was not going to ruin her makeup now. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For raising me. For being here." "Like we'd miss you getting married in Greenwich." Aunt Ruth rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "To a terrifyingly handsome man who clearly adores you. It's like a fairy tale." It was, completely. And after that evening in the garden 2 years ago, Amara and Yun-ki had made it work. It hadn't been easy. His world had weight, exactly as he had warned her. And there were nights she lay awake, understanding the full measure of what she had walked into when she walked into that car. But he had never hidden anything from her, and she had never pretended to be anything other than exactly who she was. And somewhere in that mutual honesty, they had built something that felt, improbably and wonderfully, like solid ground. 6 months ago, he had proposed in the same garden where they had kissed for the first time, under the oak tree, with Sora sitting cross-legged in the grass beside them, narrating the entire event to Luca, the rabbit, in real time. Now they were getting married in a small, beautiful chapel in Greenwich. Old stone walls, and the stained glass that scattered colored light across the floor. Flowers everywhere, white and fragrant and soft. The music started, and Amara's heart raced. Aunt Grace handed her the bouquet of white roses, and Aunt Ruth gave her one last hug before guiding her to the door. When it opened and she saw the interior of the chapel, she almost forgot to breathe. The stained glass glowed with colored light. There were flowers everywhere. And at the end of the aisle, waiting with a smile that lit up his entire face, was Hyun-ki. He wore a dark navy suit that made his eyes seem even more impossible. And for the first time since she had known him, this man who had never once, in all the months she had observed him, shown anything that could be called nerves. He looked genuinely nervous. His hands were clasped in front of his body, and he kept fidgeting with the ring he already wore on his pinky finger. When Amara started walking down the aisle, their eyes met and everything else disappeared. She didn't see the guests. She didn't see Seo Jin Park sitting in the front row with an expression of gruff approval. Sora beside him, in a white dress identical to the one she had worn the first day they met, holding Luca the rabbit, who had somehow acquired a new ear for the occasion. She didn't see her aunts in the front pew, already crying again. She didn't see the men Hyun-ki trusted most, sitting quietly in the back rows with the stillness of people who had learned stillness as a profession. It was just Hyun-ki, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the universe. When she finally reached the altar, he took her hands and whispered, so only she could hear, "You look like peace." She understood exactly what he meant. When the vows came, Hyun-ki squeezed her hands and looked at her with that almost smile, which was, by now, considerably more than almost. "Amara Mensa," he began, his voice steady despite the suspicious brightness in his eyes. "I accept you and every wrong car you ever get into from here on out. I promise to always have a room ready, always have coffee waiting, and always, always remind you that you are the most important thing in my life." Laughter moved through the chapel like warmth. Amara had to blink several times to hold back her tears. "Hyun-ki Jang," she said when it was her turn, her voice trembling just slightly. I accept you and every impossible, dangerous, stubborn thing about your world. I promise to always show up, always speak to you honestly, and always remind you that even the most feared man in the room needs to sit under an oak tree sometimes and listen to a rabbit story. More laughter, and Hyun-ki was smiling so completely that it transformed his entire face. Not the almost smile, not the controlled fractional shift, but the real thing, unguarded and full. The smile of a man who had stopped being careful about being seen. From the front pew, a small voice cut through the chapel with perfect clarity. Ajosi Hyun-ki and Amara Uni are getting married, Sora announced to anyone who hadn't noticed. Seo-jin put his hand on her shoulder. Soraya, we know. That's why we're here. But Luca didn't know, Sora said seriously. I'm telling Luca. The chapel erupted. Hyun-ki looked at Amara, shaking his head with that full, real smile. Our first fans. The best fans, Amara agreed. The priest, composing himself admirably, said, You may kiss your bride. Hyun-ki didn't wait. He pulled Amara close and kissed her deeply, unhurriedly, not caring about the applause and the whistles that rang through the old stone chapel. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like people who had forgotten to be dignified and found they didn't mind at all. Finally, he murmured against her lips. My wife. Finally, she whispered back. My husband. The reception was in the estate gardens, lit by hundreds of candles and strung lights that turned the old stone walls gold. Tables were covered in white flowers. The fountain ran. The food was extraordinary, and the night was cool and perfect, and Amara moved through it feeling, for the first time in as long as she could remember, like she was not passing through someone else's beautiful life, but living her own. When it came time for speeches, Hyun-ki stood with a glass in his hand, and the room went quiet, the way rooms always went quiet for him. Reflexively, completely. Except now, the quiet was warm rather than wary. 2 years ago, he began, a woman got into my car by mistake and completely changed my life. He looked at Amara across the candlelit table, and the love in his eyes was so unguarded, so fully present, that several people in the garden who had known Hyun-ki Jang for decades looked at each other in quiet astonishment. She taught me, he continued, that the most important deals are not closed in boardrooms. They are made in gardens, under oak trees, in the ordinary, extraordinary moments that most people in my world have learned to live without. He paused. She taught me that the children who trust you are the most honest judges of character in the world. And she taught me that peace is not something you build or buy or protect with walls. He looked at Amara. It's something that walks into your car by accident and falls asleep before you can introduce yourself. Laughter and applause. Amara pressed her hand to her mouth. Amara Jang. He raised his glass. Thank you for getting into the wrong car. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Amara stood up and crossed to him and kissed him in front of everyone because she simply could not stay seated, and the garden filled with noise and warmth, and Sora's voice announcing to Luca that the kissing part had started again. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she stood with her glass and looked out at the candlelit faces. Her aunts, Seo-jin's rare open smile, the staff who had given her fresh clothes and chamomile tea on the first terrifying night, the people who made up the complicated, layered, difficult, and deeply human world she had married into. I got into the wrong car, she said. The garden laughed. And I have thought about that moment so many times in the last 2 years, about how one wrong turn, one moment of exhaustion, one night when I was too tired to look twice at the vehicle I was climbing into, How that single accident became the axis around which my entire life reoriented. She looked at Hyun-ki. I spent years being invisible in other people's spaces, moving through rooms designed by other people's lives, caring for other people's children, building a future I kept having to postpone. And I was good at it, and I was grateful for it, but I had quietly, without quite admitting it to myself, stopped expecting that a room would ever be built for me. The garden was completely still. And then a man told me I was in his car, and instead of sending me away, he wrote me a note. Her voice caught. Dangerous people don't write notes, Hyun-ki. They send men. She smiled at him through the brightness in her eyes. Thank you for being the kind of dangerous that writes notes. Thank you for the chamomile tea and the oak tree and the room that was mine. And thank you for showing me that the life I had stopped expecting was waiting in the last place I would ever have thought to look. She raised her glass. To wrong cars, she said. To wrong cars, the garden answered. Amara sat in the garden of the Jang estate on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Their daughter, Nari, 2 years old, her father's dark, watchful eyes and her mother's wide, unstoppable smile, asleep in her lap, heavy and warm, the way small, sleeping children are heavy and warm, like something entirely at peace. Sora, 6 years old now and opinions, was conducting an elaborate courtroom drama in which Luca the rabbit stood accused of stealing a persimmon from the kitchen. She was presenting evidence to Hyun-ki with the focused intensity of a child who had decided she would one day be a lawyer, or possibly a judge, or possibly both. Hyun-ki was listening with complete, unperformed attention. No phone. No business. This was the arrangement. He kept it every time. What does the defendant say? Sora demanded. Hyun-ki looked at the rabbit. He says he was framed. Sora narrowed her eyes. That's what they all say. Is it? Hyun-ki said gravely. Perhaps we should hear the witnesses. Sora considered this with the seriousness it deserved. The witnesses are the garden birds and they only speak bird, she said. This is a problem. A significant one. Amara watched them from the stone wall, her hand resting on sleeping Nari's back, the October sun warm on her face. The fountain ran. The oak tree's leaves had gone gold at the edges. The estate was quiet in the particular way it got quiet on afternoons like this. Not the held breath quiet of a world full of danger and calculation, but the deep, settled quiet of a house that had found its rhythm. Hyun-ki looked up and found her watching him. Across the garden, across the courtroom drama and the sleeping baby and the October light, he looked at her the way he had looked at her since that first night, with the full, unguarded attention of a man who had spent 36 years in a world that required him to keep everything carefully behind glass and had discovered in the back of a car on a dark interstate that he no longer wanted to. Amara smiled. He held her gaze for a moment, then, quietly enough that only she could hear it across the garden. You look like peace. She had heard him say it before. At the altar. In the garden. On ordinary mornings when she was drinking coffee and not thinking about anything in particular, and he would find her and say it like it was still true every time. Like it did not get less true with repetition, but more. You say that a lot, she said. It's true a lot, he said. Sora looked between them. Are you going to kiss again? Probably, Hyun-ki said. Sora addressed this information to Luca the rabbit with the resigned patience of someone who had accepted that adults were simply like this. They're going to kiss again, she reported. We'll wait. Nari stirred in Amara's lap, blinked her father's dark eyes at the October sky, and went immediately back to sleep. Amara looked at the garden, at the oak tree, at the man who had never written anyone a note, and had written her one on the very first night, because, as he had told her once, he had found that he wanted to. She thought about the wrong car, about 22 minutes, and a wrong door, and a leather seat that smelled of expensive cologne, and a voice that said, "You're in my car with the patience of a man who had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this disruption." She thought about how the whole of her life had pivoted on a single moment of exhausted inattention, and how that moment had delivered her here. This garden, this man, this sleeping child, this life that was entirely, completely, unmistakably her own. She pressed her lips to the top of Nari's head. Yun-Ki came and sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and she leaned into him the way she had learned to lean, not for support, because she had always been her own support, but for the particular pleasure of choosing to. "Sora wants us to testify," he said quietly, "as character witnesses for the rabbit." "What's my position?" "Defense, I think. She's assigned me to the prosecution." "Bold of her." "She takes after you." Amara laughed, the real laugh, the uncontained one that she had stopped apologizing for in other people's houses and had never once apologized for here. It woke Nari, who looked up at her mother with an expression of profound indignation, before deciding that the October sky was interesting enough to forgive the disturbance. She would tell Nari the story someday. The whole story, from the beginning. The wrong car, and the dark interstate, and the note on the dresser, and the little girl with the one-eared rabbit who had taught her the word for safe. She would tell her that the best things don't always announce themselves. That they arrive, sometimes, the way fate tends to arrive, through the wrong door, at the worst possible time, looking nothing like what you expected, and everything like what you needed. She would tell her that the bravest thing she ever did was not demanding to be let out of that car. It was deciding, quietly and completely, to stay. Because sometimes the best plans are the ones we never make. The best stories start with the worst mistakes, and the best loves happen when we least expect them. Amara got into the wrong car and found the right way home.